Hey there! Today we're talking about Harper Lee's Pulitzer Prize-winning To Kill a Mockingbird, a novel just as good to cozy up with as it is to discuss in the classroom. I've got my cuppa right here, so we're ready to go. Ah, hot, black and strong, just like Mayella likes 'em. What, too early for that one? To Kill a Mockingbird is a classic piece of American literature. Widely studied in schools and immensely popular besides, it's held to be still relevant almost 60 years after its publication because of its gentle yet astute commentary on such broad themes as courage and prejudice. Set in the small town of Macomb, Alabama, the narrative moves in a series of episodes around Scout, her brother Jem, and their father Atticus. Despite its circular structure, the book can be read as a Bildungsroman, or a coming-of-age story. Over the 2 years it spans, Scout and Jem are disabused of their childhood beliefs about the world by a series of events, the most turbulent of which is the trial of Tom Robinson, a black man accused of raping a white girl. By the end of the novel, the 8-year-old Scout has absorbed her father's lessons on morality, even if she doesn't yet fully understand all of them. Jem's learning arc is clearer. We witness him beginning to grasp concepts about courage and about the structure of society even before he turns 12 and becomes Mr. Jem. Really, before we get into Mockingbird, we need to understand the historical context. We need to know about the early days of the southern states, with their roots in chattel slavery, about the bitterness of the American Civil War, which saw the official abolition of slavery, but not the end of contempt for or mistreatment of African Americans, about the subsequent laws on segregation in the South, and the institutionalized racism that was intensified by the Great Depression, which was when Mockingbird was set. We also need to ask what it means to be Southern. Now, the southernness of Mockingbird is pretty easy to discern, what with the characters' accents and the use of words like scuppernongs and druthers. But what's also encoded in the language are the social and racial values of the Macomb inhabitants. The expectation that people be addressed Sir, Ma'am, Rachel, or Mr. Arthur speaks to the importance of manners and following social codes. On the other hand, African American characters are routinely referred to with derogatory terms, suggesting that racism is just as entrenched in Southern societies as formalities are. And where else do we see racism in Mockingbird? Well, everywhere really. When Scout asks Atticus whether it isn't wrong to defend a black man because everyone else seems to think so, she's simply parroting the beliefs common in Macomb. The same is true for Jem's assumption that Miss Morty could just get a coloured man to help her clean up the ruins of her ravaged house, instead of doing it herself. The children are echoing the sentiments of the adults, although they don't really understand the implications of these ideas. Much of the racism in Macomb is casual racism. That is, it's hinted at through dialogue as well as references to Confederate artifacts and Civil War generals such as Braxton Bragg, John Bell Hood, and Stonewall Jackson, figures whom, it is suggested, all the inhabitants of the town know and adore. But the truly poisonous racism in Mockingbird surrounds the trial of Tom Robinson. He's an upstanding family man, has never made any trouble before, and the case against him is so weak as to be almost non-existent. In a courtroom presided over by a supposedly unbiased judge, his case should have held. If he had been white, it would have held. The plaintiff, Bob Ewell, is a man well known for his detestable character, and not much else. Against a white man's word, his counts for squat, yet he is still held to be more reliable than a black man. We see in this episode that upholding the law doesn't ensure that justice will be done. This is one of the hardest lessons Scout and Jem in particular learn before they reach a semblance of maturity. But let's go back in time a little. Just a few days before Tom's trial, a lynch mob turns up at Macomb Jail, attempting to carry out its own idea of justice. One of the men who make up the mob is Mr. Cunningham. Scout's decision to sympathize with him stems from the lessons she's been taught about being polite to everyone and trying to imagine herself in their shoes. This marks a sort of courage different to the physical courage she's been used to relying on. It's the courage of trying to find common ground even with those whose actions are seemingly despicable. Another type of courage explored in Mockingbird is the determination to do what's right, even if it's hopeless. As Atticus says, "It's when you know you're licked before you begin, but you begin anyway and you see it through no matter what." Mrs. Dubose, despite her feeble, cranky ways, is courageous because she persevered with her painful fight against morphine addiction. And although he can't play football or capture criminals like a sheriff, Atticus is courageous for taking on Tom Robinson's tremendous case. So there it is, To Kill a Mockingbird, a romping read with incongruously weighty themes. And while there are 100 questions still to answer, what role does Aunt Alexandra play, if any, in Scout's upbringing? Does the book offer too simplified a view on social stratification? Does it deprive African American characters of their own voice? I'm going to leave it here because my tea's run out. See you next time on the Teacup series.